If you watch any movie and try to count one by one every person on screen, whether in the center of the screen or in a distant background, your total count will be over hundreds. If it's a movie like Lord of the Rings or World War Z or just an episode of Game of Thrones, you can come across a million people on screen. Try to pay each one $100 a day for being in the movie, not including the expense of feeding them, clothing them, and paying for their gas. It would be impossible to make movies at the rate they are making them today. For example, a fight scene in a Game of Thrones episode, The Battle of the Bastards, at this rate would cost 100 million, which is too expensive, and we know it costed about $11 million. So how did they do it? The most obvious answer to making large crowds in movies is CGI. But what people forget is CGI is both expensive and hard to do. Plus, it takes a lot of time to render out a scene from a polymesh to an actual viewable movie scene. And if not done right, you will end up with this or this and this. My point is, you don't want to see bad CGI, it will mess you up, or you will end up on this channel. A combination of CGI and other techniques are used to make large crowds, and for indie filmmakers without a CGI budget or old movies that could not take advantage of the technology we have today, these are some of the techniques they use or they used to use back in the day to make large crowds in movies. Brute forcing. In the early days or on a low budget movie, if you want a crowd, you just have to get actual people to be your crowd. Some movie directors are okay with using the crowd of people who come to see the movie being made. They just do a crowd call and get volunteers. This is by far the cheapest way to do it, but not necessarily the best and more efficient way to do it. Volunteer crowds are good if the movie script just needs background people going on with their day-to-day routines, like standing, walking, or talking. If you need more than that, you may have to invest in professional actors. You would think people are good at pretending to be going on with their day, like they do every day, but not really. When there is a camera, people tend to overact or become awkward. So the far away the camera is from the crowd, the better, so that your audience doesn't see these awkward moments. And when you want to do a close-up of the crowd, directors usually get a few real actors and mix them in the foreground of the crowd and then the volunteer crowd in the background. Using volunteers is rarely used as it has a lot of drawbacks and quite unpredictable. The Inflatable crowd company. This is a company that supplies inflatable mannequins to use in movies. Sometimes volunteers are not enough. For example, if you want to have 100,000 people cheering in a stadium or listening to a speech, inflatable mannequins are usually mixed with the crowd and given plastic faces and clothes and mixed with actual people. The camera is usually far away, and if there are no large movements in the crowd, mannequins will do a great job in these types of scenes. Over 600 inflatable mannequins were used for a scene in the movie Angels and Demons. Using those or mannequins is way cheaper than paying hundreds of people for a crowd. Employing the use of CGI is also super expensive, and hiring extras or finding volunteers is a lot expensive, and you need to spend a few days trying to make them understand what the scene requires and how they are screwing it up. The biggest disadvantage of using mannequins is they are not animated, so your crowd is going to be a little lifeless. What directors do in this case is throw in a few moving people in the crowd, and that usually throws off the audience. This is a technique that was used a lot in early sports video games like FIFA and Rally. Most of the cheering crowds were simple planes with a texture of a person. As console and PC computing power increased, game developers started mixing these simple planes with animated but low poly characters. Now it's a blend of high poly good looking characters in the front row, then you have low poly in the middle, and then planes in the back, masking and duplicating crowds. Mannequins are good for crowds that don't require a lot of movements, say people in a theater watching a play or listening to a speech, but this technique shows its limitation when you want your crowd to have a lot of movement. A good example is a crowd of football spectators cheering and making a wave. This is usually done by one row of people standing for a few seconds, and as they sit, the next row repeats and on until you have a wave effect. You need to either have an actual crowd or rely on CGI to accomplish this. If CGI is not in your budget, you don't have to skip on this. A few people can be made to look like a large crowd if you have the patience and know how to pull it off. A lot of movies just reuse the same group of people in the same scene. They pull this off by locking the camera in one location, shoot a small number of people, and then move them to another spot. Repeat this a few times while randomizing the position of your crowd and have them change clothes every time, and you'll have a convincing crowd in no time. The reason you lock the camera in one position is to avoid any perspective shift, which will make your crowd look like it was shot with different camera angles and superimposed on top of each other. It also helps with any masking that has to be done in post-production. Film Riot has a great tutorial on this topic. When your script requires the camera to be moving, then this technique becomes a bit more expensive, as you now have to invest in a motion control rig. This is a metallic arm or robot that can repeat any movements you instruct it to do over and over for as many times as you want with absolute precision. It's the equivalent of locking the camera down to avoid perspective shift. Movement in the camera will go far in making a crowd look more convincing than a locked camera. With a locked camera, it may be easy to spot repetition in the crowd or where you have reused an actor using CGI. It's hard to beat CGI when it comes to crowd simulation for a number of reasons, but the biggest one is safety and scalability. Even when you can afford hiring a crowd of 1 million people, handing them swords and letting them go at it like in the Lord of the Rings or the Battle of the Bastards in Game of Thrones is just too dangerous for any studio to do. CGI has gotten to a level where it is indistinguishable from reality that more and more directors are choosing to use it over other methods. Though it can be expensive, it's also very flexible that if the director decides to change something about the shot, it can be done as many times as time will allow. Now imagine how much time and cost it would require to reshoot a battle scene like Avengers Infinity War without any CGI. Most directors choose a mix of CGI and real footage, especially for important parts of a shot. When the camera is moving, motion tracking can be used to match the movement of the camera in real world with that of the virtual camera, where the computer-generated crowd will be added. There are standalone applications developed to handle crowds with hundreds of motion capture data that can be used for any type of crowd simulation. Most notably Massive, a crowd simulation software that was used in the making of The Lord of the Rings. To simply put, with Massive, all you have to do was copy over a few hundred thousands of characters, point them to the crowd of other generated characters and mark them as the enemy, and they will attack each other. The AI used in this software was so good that at one point a director required the heroes, who were outnumbered by the thousands, to attack a horde of orcs. When the simulation button was pressed, the heroes in the scene, on seeing that they had no chance, they just turned around and ran away. The AI had to be dumbed down by a few points to get the shot as required. How AI-based crowd simulation works. A few things have to be in place for you to have a convincing crowd simulation. 1. The crowd agents. A crowd agent is the entity or entity representation in your crowd. Crowd agents can range from humans, dogs, insects, or cars. The AI has to be simply tweaked to match the entity it's simulating. A crowd's environment will influence how the crowd behaves. Most crowd simulation programs like Massive or Golem or Miami will let you add external influences like forces, wind, tornadoes, basically anything that you want to throw at your crowd. And if you want to see how CGI crowd simulation works, you can always look for crowd simulation demos on YouTube to see how they are simulated. Thanks for watching. If you want more videos like this, remember to like, subscribe, share this video. And if you are a CGI artist or want to get into 3D modeling, this is a good channel to start. And if you are an established 3D artist and you want to get some models to use in your project, I have a large 3D asset library on cgtrader.com/ismailsvfx or TurboSquid. I'll be leaving all the links in the description so that you can check out my models, or you can become a Patreon and get my models directly there for free. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.